The drawer was supposed to have a spare house key. Instead, my hand froze over a face-down photograph, an amber-yellowed letter, and an envelope with my husband's name on it, written in the handwriting of a man who had been dead for 11 years. His father's handwriting. I looked up. Sorrel was standing in the kitchen doorway watching me. She hadn't made a sound crossing the floor. She simply stood there, perfectly still, perfectly composed, and said nothing at all. That silence told me everything. We moved in with my mother-in-law, and it didn't take long to realize something was seriously off with her. My name is Calla Verne, and I am not someone who panics easily. I grew up in a house where the pipes leaked in winter and the heating worked only when it felt generous. My mother raised my brother and me on a teacher's salary and stubborn optimism. The kind that doesn't pretend problems don't exist, it just refuses to let them win. I learned early that discomfort is a condition you adjust to, that tight corners don't last forever, that the only way through something difficult is exactly that, through it. I married Ren Verne 3 years ago in his uncle's backyard under a string of lights threaded through an old apple tree. It wasn't a grand wedding. 40 people, paper lanterns, a shared food table. What I remember most is that when Ren took my hand at the end of it, he looked at me the way people look at something they intend to take care of. Steady and certain and without performance. That was Ren. A structural engineer by trade, a problem solver by instinct. He believed in load-bearing things, foundations, frameworks, the honest bones beneath the surface of anything. The decision to move in with his mother wasn't dramatic. It was just math. A failed investment, an unexpected surgery on Ren's knee, and a rental market that punished people trying to do everything right. We sat at the kitchen table one evening with a spreadsheet and 2 cups of cold coffee, and we both already knew. "She has the space," Ren said. "How long?" I asked. 6 months, 8 at the outside. I wasn't afraid. I'd met Sorrel Verne 4 times before, at the wedding, 2 holiday dinners, and once when she drove 3 hours to drop off a casserole after Ren's surgery. Polite each time, present but measured, the kind of woman who chose her words carefully and never said one more than was needed. "She's a little particular," Ren warned me the week before the move, folding shirts into a suitcase. "Particular how?" I asked. He paused, genuinely searching. "Structured," he said finally. I told myself I could handle structured. What I didn't know was that Sorrel's house wasn't just a home. It was a vault. We arrived on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 carloads and a borrowed trailer. Her house sat at the end of a gravel road, long, low-roofed, with a wraparound porch and a garden tended with clear devotion. Roses in careful rows, herbs along a stone border, a vine trained so precisely up a wooden trellis it looked architectural. A stone bench sat beneath an enormous oak whose roots had buckled the path beside it. Sorrel met us at the door in pressed slacks and a cream blouse at 4 in the afternoon. Sharp gray eyes, silver hair pinned back. She took both my hands when she greeted me and studied my face with the focused attention of someone reading a document. "Calla," she said warmly, "I've been wanting more time with you." "Thank you for having us," I said. "We won't be any trouble." She smiled. It was gracious and well-practiced, but her eyes stayed exactly where they were, cool, measuring, giving nothing back. "Of course you won't," she said. 3 words. I would hear them a dozen times over the coming weeks, and each time they would feel less like reassurance and more like something I couldn't name. There's a quiet courage in admitting you need help, in packing your life into boxes and moving into someone else's space, and saying you can't do it alone right now. Pride tells us that needing anything is weakness, but the truest strength knows when to accept support, even on uncomfortable terms. The bravest thing Calla and Ren did wasn't surviving the hardship. It was being willing to be seen in it. The first week was polite. The second week was instructive. Dinner was at 6:30, not 7. The back door locked by 9, no exceptions. The dish towels were folded a particular way I got wrong 4 times before I got it right. None of this bothered me enormously. A person's home is their rhythm, and I could adapt. What I couldn't adapt to was the feeling that something in this house was being deliberately kept out of reach. Low and persistent, like a hum just outside the range of hearing. It was the notebook that first made me stop and pay attention. Sorrel kept a brown leather notebook on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker. Every morning when I came downstairs, she would be seated with it open, pen in hand, and the moment I reached the bottom step, she would close it. Not hastily, not with embarrassment, deliberately, like punctuation at the end of a sentence. "What's that?" I asked one morning, keeping my tone light. "Notes," she said. "On what?" "Things I want to remember." A brief pause, then she pivoted the conversation to whether I'd slept well. I was halfway through answering before I realized she'd redirected me so cleanly I'd nearly missed it. I mentioned it to Ren that night. "She journals," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "She's always done that." "She closes it every time she hears me coming." "Because it's private, Calla," he said. "Let her have her notebook." I let it go, but I kept my eyes open. The phone calls were next. Sorrel's routine was precise as a tide chart. Breakfast at 7:30, garden until 11, reading until noon. But twice a week, on days that seemed deliberately irregular, she would disappear into her bedroom and close the door. 20 minutes later, she'd emerge, subtly recalibrated, like a compass that had been pulled off course and slowly found north again. Whatever those calls were, they cost her something, and she never mentioned them. Then came the afternoon I found the drawer. Silence in a home is not always peace. Sometimes silence is architecture, built deliberately to hold something in place. The things we don't say to the people we love have weight. They live in closed notebooks, in locked drawers, in the half-second pause before an answer arrives. Real honesty isn't only the absence of lies. It's the willingness to speak when speaking is the harder, more vulnerable thing to do. I was looking for a spare key to the back gate. Ren said there was one somewhere in the kitchen. I opened 3 drawers before I opened the wrong one, narrow, beside the stove, and stopped. Inside, a face-down photograph, a folded letter, paper-aged to old honey, a small key on a plain ring, and an unsealed envelope with a name written on the front in handwriting that wasn't Sorrel's. Ren. Larger letters, slightly uneven, written with a heavier hand. I had never seen Ren's father's handwriting before, but I knew, with the certainty of a feeling that arrives already fully formed, exactly whose it was. I looked up. Sorrel was standing in the kitchen doorway. She hadn't made a sound. She stood completely still, not with anger, not with panic, but with something far more controlled than either. Her hands were loose at her sides. Her face was unreadable. Neither of us spoke for a long moment. Then I closed the drawer softly and said, "I was looking for the gate key." "It's on the hook by the back door," she said. Her voice was perfectly level. "It always has been." I nodded and walked past her, and she let me. We didn't speak of it at dinner, but my hands weren't quite steady, and I felt her gray eyes on me across the table, like pressure on glass. "You seem tired, Calla," she said. "You should sleep more." "I'm fine," I said. "Of course you are," she said again. I waited 2 weeks before I told Ren. I chose a Saturday morning when Sorrel had gone to the market. We sat on the back porch in the early sun, and I told him everything. The drawer, the photograph, the letter, the name written in a dead man's hand. Calmly, without accusation. He didn't speak for a long time. A bird landed on the oak tree above the stone bench and left again. She kept it, he said finally, to himself more than to me. The letter was addressed to you. His jaw tightened. Before my father died, he told her he wanted to leave me something. A letter. She told me there was no letter, that he'd meant to write one, but never had the time or the strength. He stopped, drew a breath. She looked me in the eye, and she told me that. The morning air between us shifted. Ren, I was 24, he said, and his voice had a fracture in it now, clean and precise. She decided I wasn't ready. She made that call, and she never told me. He picked up his mug, then set it back down without drinking. For 11 years. We need to talk to her, I said quietly. Together. Yeah, he said. We do. Control, even when it's built entirely from love, is still control. The hardest lesson a parent faces is learning the difference between protecting someone and deciding for them. When we withhold truth from the people we love, even painful truth, even truth with sharp edges, we aren't protecting them. We're protecting ourselves from the discomfort of watching them feel it. No one builds a cage meaning to, but the door still locks from the outside. That evening, after dinner, Ren asked his mother to sit down. I stood in the doorway, not to intervene, but so she knew I already knew, and so Ren didn't have to carry the weight of it alone. Sorel settled into the armchair across from her son, hands folded in her lap. Whatever storm she sensed coming, she had dressed for it years ago. The letter, Mom, Ren said. 4 words, quiet and flat and immovable. Her composure held for 3 full seconds. Then something deep beneath it shifted. Not visibly, the way a foundation shifts in a house before the first crack appears in the plaster. I was protecting you, she said. From your father? From his guilt. Her voice stayed even, controlled, but not cold. It was the voice of someone holding something very heavy and refusing to drop it. He spent 30 years carrying guilt that had nothing to do with you, Ren. And the last thing he wanted was to leave it on your doorstep the morning after his funeral. I read the letter. I made a choice. You made my choice, Ren said. Yes. Her voice cracked then, just at the seam, a hairline fracture. Because you were my child, and he was my husband, and there was no good answer available. Only the one I thought would hurt the least. She looked at her son steadily. I have lived with it every day since. The room was absolutely still. Ren looked at his mother for a long time, not with fury, but with the face of someone finally seeing the shape of a thing he had been walking around for years without knowing it was there. Give me the letter, he said. She rose without argument, walked to the kitchen, and came back with the envelope. She placed it on the table between them, the way you set down something you have been carrying too long, with relief and with grief and with both at once. Then she walked to the back door and stepped quietly into the garden. Forgiveness is not a feeling. It is not the sudden disappearance of pain or the erasure of what was done. It is a direction, a choice to move towards someone rather than away, even after they failed you, even when they held back what you deserved. It isn't made once. It's made again and again in small daily decisions, until one day, the distance between you becomes something you can cross. Ren read the letter alone. I gave him that completely. When he found me 40 minutes later, his eyes were red, but he wasn't broken. He looked steadier, the way a structure looks when the weak material is cleared away and you can finally see what was actually holding everything up. He said he watched me grow up through windows, Ren told me. That he let work take everything that should have been ours and stood outside of my childhood, looking in. He said I was the best thing he ever did, and he was sorry he let himself believe otherwise. He paused. He said he loved me, the way some men don't know how to say out loud. But if I was reading the letter, at least I'd know. Did you know? I asked. I've known for years, Ren said. I just didn't have the words to hold it. Now I have his. He went outside and sat down on the stone bench beside his mother. I watched through the kitchen window. They talked for a long time in the fading light, not with heat or urgency, but with the slow, deliberate honesty of two people who had been circling something for years and finally agreed to walk toward it. At one point, Sorel said something and Ren shook his head. Not dismissively, but the way you respond to something that is sad and true. Then Sorel laughed. Suddenly, genuinely, pulled out of her before she could compose it. The sound of it carried through the glass. Ren reached over and placed his hand over hers on the bench. She looked down at it, and she let him keep it there. The most difficult people in our lives are rarely difficult without reason. Every wall has a story. Every closed drawer belongs to someone who learned, somewhere along the way, that openness cost too much. Patience isn't naivety. It's the choice to keep asking why before you decide what. And sometimes the family that unsettles you most is the one that quietly, permanently changes you for the better.
We stayed 9 months in the end. Not 6, not 8, 9.
And the house became, in its careful and particular way, a place we were part of rather than guests in. Sorel never became warm in the arms open sense, but her edges softened, the way stone softens near water. Gradually, then all at once. The notebook stopped being closed when I walked in. She never explained it. She simply stopped. One afternoon, I found her in the garden pulling weeds, and I crouched beside her without asking, and we worked in easy silence for an hour. "You're not what I expected," she said eventually. "What did you expect?" She considered it seriously. "Someone less patient." "I almost wasn't," I admitted. She looked at me then, and for the first time, those gray eyes weren't measuring me. They were simply seeing me. Something in her face settled. "Good," she said quietly. "That's better than perfect." The week before Ren and I left, I helped Sorel plant 3 rose bushes along the south fence. She didn't hug me at the door on the day we moved out. She wasn't that person, and I had stopped expecting her to be, which was its own kind of growth. But she took my hands in hers the same way she had on the very first day. And this time, when she studied my face, I understood what she was doing. She was keeping it. "Come back in summer," she said. "The roses will be something by then." "We will," I said, and I meant it completely. On the drive home, Ren reached across and took my hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For not making me choose. For staying through the part that wasn't easy." He glanced at me, then back at the road. Some people would have left. The afternoon light stretched long and golden across the open fields on either side of us. The kind of light that makes everything look like it's in the process of being forgiven. "She's not off," I said. "No?" Ren said. She's guarded. There's a difference. I know, he said softly. I think I just needed someone else to see it before I could let myself see it clearly. I held his hand and said nothing more, and we drove the rest of the way home in the quiet, unguarded silence of two people with nothing left to hide. If this story moved you, made you think, or reminded you of someone you love, give it a like and subscribe for more stories that go where life actually lives. Every share puts this in front of someone who might need it today.